Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Standby AAPI conference. And it's now time for our session 2 panel, Activism Creating Positive Change. I'm Chloe Mashana, a co-project director at the Tester magazine, and I'll be one of the moderators for this panel.
I'm Huan Chen, Executive Director at the Tester magazine, and I will be the second moderator at this panel. And today we have some wonderful panelists here, Adriana and Kim. Adriana, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Adriana. I use she, her pronouns. I am a junior at Lowell High School in San Francisco, and I am also the executive director of SF Change, which is an organization that provides, equitable education to students in San Francisco, as well as the District 7 Youth Commissioner, so on the San Francisco Youth Commission. So I represent young people in my city and district. Oh, and I can pass it to Kim.
Sorry. Hi. My name is Kim Syra. I'm a Filipino Chinese immigrant, and I do our activism work on Instagram at Kim Syra. Oh, I use she, her pronouns. And yeah, I'm really committed to just creating more equal representation for all Asian Americans, specifically like South and Southeast Asians, because I identify as that. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And all of your stories are really, really inspirational. I think you all could definitely provide some insight in your answers to our panel questions. And before we get started, to our audience, feel free to add any questions or comments for our panelists in the YouTube live chat, and we'll go over a few of the questions during our audience Q&A session. And Huan, would you like to get started with our questions for the panelists?
Of course, let's get started with the first question. Would you like to talk about how you got involved in activism? And have you had to relearn anything since joining the activism space?
I definitely am always unlearning and relearning. There's just always something I'm like, oh, I thought it was one thing and it's not, and I have to relearn that topic. So that's just something that's always been ongoing for me. I started officially in the activism space, and I say officially because now it's really like I do this every day all the time, but I wasn't doing it every day at one point. And it started because when I first worked at my first job outside of college, I'm 24 by the way, but when I first graduated college and started working for the first time, I noticed that no one at my workplace was talking about the elephant in the room, which was at the time the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening. There wasn't a safe space for Black employees, and it really upset me and confused me at the same time. And I think that's when I took the time offline to really just educate myself, digest what was happening, create art activism on Instagram. And I guess now we're at this point because it's just an ongoing process for me. But yeah, I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, for me, I think I've always been interested in community issues, but I've never really used my voice until maybe like a few years ago when I also saw the Black Lives Matter protests. But like ever since I was a kid, I would like flip through the voter pamphlets and be like, oh, cool, like this is happening in my city. Yeah, and then going on to the second question, which was, relearning and unlearning. I've, like him, I've constantly had to unlearn and relearn, but one of the things that stood out to me that recently I had to really acknowledge was that I had to relearn my position in this world as a quote activist, because I've had to reframe it in a way that was like, not everything is about me. I know that sounds kind of obvious, but in some cases it's not. So for example, with the Palestine and Israel conflict, my first instinct was to do research, figure out what was going on, and then like have a position on it so that I can advocate for or against it, right? But then I realized there are some spaces where it is not my turn to speak, and I need to respect that rather than taking up the space of a Palestinian like activist and influencer. Like I don't feel comfortable in that space when somebody who has the lived experiences can express that better than I can. So just realizing that many online activists have their platform for a reason, and it's not always like my place to step over them or like bring out my opinion when it is not my opinion to have. But of course, it's still really important to be an advocate and use your voice. You just have to be aware of when the spaces are appropriate and if you are the best person to be able to share that message.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And there's really part of activism is really just knowing when it's your turn to speak and when it's your turn to just amplify. And I also think that it's been really nice hearing all of your perspectives on that. And in terms of youth, it can be especially hard to feel like our voices are being heard since we don't have that political capital. So, what are some barriers in the activism space that you've overcome? And would you have any advice as well?
So I stopped calling myself an activist like this week. So it's a very new thing I'm doing because so as someone who definitely does most of my activism work on social media, I'm very much a social media online person, and that's where I do a lot of my art activism work and whatnot. I realize that the main barrier that I've been facing is just the constant, if you support this, are you going to post about it? Like questions that I always get in my messages. The Palestine riots are happening. I mean, like, what's going on there? Are you going to talk about it? Or I get those all the time. And like Adriana said, there are many times where it really isn't my position to speak on it and just amplify the activists, organizations that know more, and just knowing my place in that, which is why like I very much talk so boldly and loudly about Asian issues because I identify as that. But yeah, just I gave up the activism label because I think there is a huge pressure, at least for what I'm noticing on social media, of just speaking on things, and people come to you for news, people come to you for information, not knowing that you're an actual human being learning these things at the same time. I'm like not a news source. I'm learning just like everyone else. I'm gonna make my mistakes online, and then correct them. But yeah, I think that's just been the biggest barrier I've just been facing so far. What about you, Adriana?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like, just because you don't speak out about something doesn't mean you don't support it. There are obviously so many complex issues. Like, I have a difficult time wrapping my head around 99.9% of them. Another barrier that I've particularly faced in the advocacy space is just youth in government. So, as I said, I am a commissioner on the San Francisco Youth Commission, which means that I go to City Hall and I sit in a room with like adults and I talk. Um, Something that has been really hard is for me, earlier I was talking about not taking up space, but in a place where it is your turn to speak, it can be really hard to take up space. And I've really had to sit with that because as a young person, like I'm 16, so going into City Hall with like these adults who have careers, who are elected officials, who are staff people, they think they know it all. And it's sometimes really hard for adults to step back and listen to youth voices. And there's just the bureaucracy in general can be really difficult to manage for young people. So I've had to overcome just the fact that knowing that my voice is important and I'm there for a reason, and like I should speak up for young people because that is my job, that's my role. And making sure that the adults in the room understand that and are willing to listen.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience with activism and challenges that you've encountered. It can't be really tough work, but through it all, you persevere for the cause. And Kim, you talked about like social media activism and the challenge that you have been experiencing. And since activism has reached new audiences with the rise of social media and just activism on social media in general, so some forms of social media activism can be ineffective, referred to as slacktivism or performative activism. So how do you ensure that your activism extends beyond the screen? And Adriana, you can also answer if you have any insights on this as well.
Yeah, I've been doing this consistently for a year now, a little bit over a year. And one of my biggest fears in this social media space is coming off as performative. It's something I tried to tackle like very early on, because I don't want to make it seem performative to myself and also to the user. I mean to the viewer, but basically I for me personally, like my process for creating these graphics aren't just like a one and done. And I know it very much seems like that to the people viewing it, like, oh, you're just taking information, putting it on a graphic and posting it. You know, that takes like an hour to do. I actually start my research like weeks in advance. So like I already know what topic I'm going to be working on. And if it's like the sudden news, like for example, like the Asian massacre, that happened in Atlanta, that was obviously very sudden, and I had my graphics go out the next morning. I stayed up all night creating that graphic. I didn't sleep to create that. And I think just like knowing like on my end that I'm continuously learning about a topic, just because I posted about Palestine doesn't mean I'm finished with that topic. I'm still doing learning on my end. And what I like to tell my viewers or the people who follow and support me is that these graphics are really a starting point. They're never the end of your education. And the reason why I say that is because sometimes there is information that I can't put on the graphic because there is no space. And that information might be important for context, or and I just couldn't include it. So I always tell people that these graphics that you see, whether they're mine or someone else's, are really a starting point, not the end of your education. This really is like the bouncing off point. And just understanding that the people who create these graphics, such as myself, such as other people, we take a long time to do these things. It's not like we do them just to for clout or just to put them out. We take a lot of time to do these because if we do them wrong, not only is it misinformation, which I'm sure we don't want to put out there, it puts us in trouble. It like cancels us. So why would we want to do that? But yeah, that's just like my whole ramble about performative activism.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that by saying like performative activism, a lot of the times just everyday people will feel like reposting maybe one of Kim's wonderful graphics like on their story, on their Instagram story, or like reposting it is enough. But to that, I just want to say it's not. Not only do you have to learn, not only should you learn more, um, the fact when you post it on your story and then 15 other people who see your story post it again, it stays in this little bubble. Um, of course, you know, you're trying to get the information out there, but a lot of the times when you click it twice and it ends up on your story, like other people are doing that as well, and then nobody ends up reading it and actually educating themselves. So the first step to that is really learning about it. The second step is maybe adding your own commentary or reaching out to people so that you can learn more, and specifically diving into these issues. So not just saying like, oh, here's an important issue that you all can learn more about, but I don't do anything about it. But again, just educating yourself, maybe writing a little bit of something about it. Even just a little bit of writing and education goes a long way, especially if you have like your friends and family or an audience watching. Also, another point is just that you should try to use your platform, if you have one, to educate rather than criticize, because like there is so much more to learn than outside of an Instagram post. So it's important to realize that a lot of people are still learning. And so just giving them the space to do so is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Kim and Adriana, for your really excellent answers. And Emma just came in, and Emma, you can sort of introduce yourself, and then you can answer this question if you'd like, and then we can move on to the next question.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Emma. I just finished my first year at NYU and I run intersectional.abc, which I consider to be a youth coalition because it is like a very big community. As for the current question on like how do I ensure that my activism extends beyond the screen, I also do a lot of like in-person work. I've worked on like the national campaign scene pretty extensively, and I also organize for like Stop Asian Hate and Black Lives Matter, and and I'm like a support organizer for things like Palestine. I think that social media is actually very important because as we've seen with Palestine, a lot of posts have been censored and a lot of them are getting taken down. But because there's such a push for support for Palestine right now, there have been changes over there because of social media. So I think like even just sharing, even just commenting and boosting someone's post, or just like putting it into your story can be really helpful and change people's opinion.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And it's really important to do that offline work, and really just social media is like a starting point, but it's not the end point. And sometimes you can also face battles like online and both offline. So as an AAPI person, how do you address microaggressions and sometimes even blatant racism, both online and offline? And anyone can go first.
I'll take the lead. So when I first did my graphic in February, I think it was just to bring awareness to the anti-Asian hate crimes. I was getting death emails. I don't know what it's called, death emails or whatever, like threatening me consistently for like a month. And it was in my DMs and it was in my emails. And I think that's when I really realized that like before then I did have like a very narrow perception about social media activism, because I was more so like, oh, like, you know, they can be performative, blah, blah, blah. They aren't really effective, blah, blah, because it's on social media. But when I received those death threats and all of that hate from people, oh, this is about microaggression, sorry, but I'll get there. I realized that social media is definitely a very real thing. It definitely like influences people's opinions, and like even like bouncing off of what Emma said, the thing about Palestine is that a lot of the opinions that people have, I won't be seeing that on the news. So social media is really like the place for me to learn these things that's like unfiltered and just raw, because I would not see this stuff on CNN, or I wouldn't be able to talk to Palestinian orgs or activists on, you know, if not for social media. But how I like overcame the hate that was happening online specifically was just going to a therapist. And I know it is a privilege. It is really expensive. There are affordable ones out there like Talkspace or Seven Cups, but it's really helped me. And just taking a step back from Instagram and social media for a little bit has also helped me a lot, because like Adriana said, like it is a bubble on social media. And as someone who does work primarily on Instagram, it can be very hard to distinguish hate on social media, like kind of like going into hate in real life. So I didn't leave my house for like a little bit because I thought someone was really going to come to my house and, you know, harm me. So being away from social media, going to therapy has helped me. And in terms of microaggressions, like in school or at the workplace, I think what really helps is to call it out when you see it. If you are in school, tell an adult, because if we don't stop these things and by not calling it out, they're just going to continue to happen. And like Adriana and Emma said, like this is the work comes into action when you actually do it in person, not on like social media is very much a starting point, not the end. So yeah, sorry I rambled. I'm passing it to whoever.
I think for me, dealing with microaggressions has been kind of a journey, because before, like for me, I very much like wanted to call every single thing out. And now I think a lot of it is picking my battles. Like literally yesterday, I was meeting some friends and some new people, and somebody was talking to me, and I thought they were like really nice and really friendly until they said something that was like kind of racist. But I was like, is this like do I really want to be spending my energy right now like educating somebody, and do I really want to be spending like my time and energy like calling somebody out who I know probably isn't going to listen to me in the first place. And so I think for me it's really deciding what I want to put my energy to and what I want to put my time to, because for me, like, I educate millions of people every week, and so picking out like one person, is that really going to change their perspective? Maybe not. And so it's just deciding like what I put my time towards.
I think that's an interesting aspect, because I think it's very true. Like, I wouldn't go like 100% and like yell at somebody if they have a microaggression every time, right? But for me, I address it through asking questions, because a lot of the times ignorance is not on purpose. And I know that sounds mean, like, oh yeah, you're ignorant, but I mean it from a place like not in a critical way, but in a way where they genuinely don't know any better. Um, so I personally just ask questions like, what do you mean by that? Like, what made you say that? Or, you know, just asking why that they thought that was appropriate. And then if they're genuinely like confused or have no idea that what they said was, offensive, they learned something that day. Obviously, there's some people who grew up like racist and don't want to change. In that case, you've done your part, you've tried. But I think the most important thing is just to ask questions and really dig at why they decided to bring a microaggression up.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking and infuriating that many of us face racism on a daily basis. But it's really inspirational then to hear about how you advocate issues despite like facing threats and hate on social media. And as Kim said, it's certainly important to bring in mental health into the conversation, and that is actually the topic of our third panel coming soon after this. And since social media can be a source to learn about the authentic opinions of people, we should still be really critical about microaggression and racism behind the screen. And in fact, most people of color face racism at some point of their life. So we would like to know, like, why is allyship important in activism, and how do you embrace allyship in your activism? And any panelist can go.
I think for me, allyship is really important because we are minorities for a reason. And if we don't stand with each other, then, like, as I said, we are minorities for a reason. So we will never accomplish anything because we are like the minority. I think standing with those who have come before us, because we do stand on the shoulders of giants, is really important. And so standing with like our Black and Brown and Indigenous siblings is highly crucial, because like a lot of the things that we have accomplished, like the civil rights movement, would not have been done without them.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just add on a little bit to this one where I think, Emma, you covered it really well, but just realizing that, yes, change starts with you, but the goal of change and allyship is that you end up with millions of people on your side. You can take that step to join the movement and you take that step to create change. But one person, like when you are embracing allyship and you're working with other people, like that's when your change really matters and has an effect.
Yeah, I agree with both. Like it was, yeah, Emma and Adriana said it really well. And just also reminding everyone that the process, to be an ally really just means to, support us as marginalized communities. But at the same time, it also means that you are going to be uncomfortable with learning something and like knowing something and having to completely unlearn it. And that's something you have to be able to confront, because if you aren't comfortable confronting your uncomfortability with things like, for example, white fragility and white privilege, a lot of white people get really uncomfortable when they start learning about those things. But once we move past that, and once we are able to recognize that, educate ourselves even more, I think that really strengthens the allyship, because anyone can be an ally, but it really just takes action and understanding and constant learning to take the step to actually do this stuff in person or like in the real world. I don't know. But yeah, sorry, I rambled again.
No, it's completely fine. And I definitely think that you've all like really added important points about how I really especially like what you said, Adriana, that like it starts with you, but it doesn't end with you. And I really think that having that aspect of allyship is really key. And with all of your experience in activism, how would you suggest that youth can get involved? And also maybe if youth aren't able to go somewhere like physically, maybe some online ways to engage as well.
Yeah. Well, I can start. So first, you can volunteer with grassroots organizations. This is both digital and in person. So if you're in California, we have Power CA, which is a really great grassroots organization. There's also Generation Citizen. You can get involved with Vote 16, which is a campaign that would allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. So promoting civic engagement with young people. Volunteer for organizations like Stop AAPI Hate, or political campaigns if you have people who are willing to support the things that you believe in. Also, there's so many online awareness campaigns, magazines, initiatives as well. If you just do search on, an issue you're passionate about, I'm sure you'll find something. And then other ways to get involved besides volunteering with grassroots organizations, I would say, is through your community or school leadership. So if you take up platforms of leadership, you can start change from there. And conversation, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like she really covered most of it. The only thing that I think I would add is I think a lot of people want to start their own organization, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if you have no experience, you should learn before you try to educate other people.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add on to that. Yeah, no, you're good answers.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing these great tips. And youth activism is really the future of where our activism will lead. And as youth of tomorrow, we should amplify our voices fearlessly and demand for change. And educating ourselves is only one small step and the first step to becoming more engaged. And getting involved comes in so many different ways, as all of our panelists just said. And as we start taking action, we'll be moving towards to build a more equal and inclusive society. And now we would like to move on to our attendees Q&As. Chloe, would you like to start with some questions from the audiences?
Yes, so our first question is, how do you handle people who leave ignorant or hateful comments, and what would you suggest that maybe youth can do if they're see a hateful comment on a post?
Well, for me, whenever I see a hateful comment, I mean, I used to get those a lot, but what I did, Instagram has a setting where you can basically restrict certain language and fill it in yourself. And that's surprisingly really helped a lot. I thought it was kind of BS at first because I don't know why, but I did it and it's really helped me a lot. Also, I think the term and the concept of blocking people, it has a very negative connotation to it because you're literally blocking someone, but I do it all the time. And really, if I don't like someone, I block them. And it's pretty simple. If they leave a comment that's kind of ignorant, and I just don't like the vibe, I'll block them. And it's just understanding that those are my boundaries. And on my page, particularly on a post that I make, it is very much my space. And as long as like I'm not doing anything that's actually wrong or harmful, and that person just being hateful and ignorant, I very much use the block button. It's yeah, it's been really helpful for me. But Emma, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, I think definitely setting my own boundaries. And I have like a little highlight, I think, that says like, this is how you can speak to me, and this is how you can DM me. And if you don't follow this, then I won't respond. And if you send me hateful things, I have no issue with blocking you. And I very much think that it's just like learning how to set boundaries. And I think like for other people who don't run large platforms, it's very much the same thing. Like just set your own boundaries online, because I feel like social media is very much a social experiment, because there has been like no testing done on like the effects, I guess, without like letting everything kind of run free. So I would say like my advice is to set your own boundaries and keep with those.
Yeah. Even though I don't have a huge platform, I would just say, like, from an audience point of view, if you were to say that to me maybe like a year ago, I'd be like, that's what if they're, wanting to have actual conversations and learn more and they just don't know. But I would just say, like, if you truly are a person looking to learn more, you're not going to go to an Instagram comment section and want to learn more and have, discussion. There are so many other resources. You can even like private message someone. There's so many other ways to learn more other than an Instagram comment session. So if it happens to be in like a smaller platform like a comment section, then yeah, remove them, block them. But if there's somebody actually trying to have a conversation, there's a fine line between wanting to have conversation and just being rude. So just realizing that is really important.
Yeah, it's definitely important to like set the boundaries and like know how to like when to respond and when not to, just for like self-care purposes as well as to just separating the kind of threats. And we have an attendee who is disabled and asks, I've been told that I'm not doing enough even though my health prevents me from doing what others can. The attendee is asking what they can do, but not as much as others. And so, do you have any suggestions on how to deal with that?
I think for me, I've found there's a very large community of like disabled activists. I don't know if like this person could look them up, but there's a lot of like groups out there and like activists who are specifically focusing on like disability issues. I think it's like don't compare yourself, I guess, to um, other people, and do what you can. And like if you're doing what you know, like this is your limit, then that's just your limit and that's okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's where the whole concept of performative activism on Instagram really changed my view, because not everyone can go to rallies in person. And especially as someone who is disabled, you do have limitations. And that's why I don't really like how for a long time, people really did think social media was performative. And I don't think it is. I think that's kind of ableist to say now, because people use social media as their main platform to create graphics or talk about issues that matter to them. So I guess my advice is, if you are able to be on, Instagram, social media, and that's where like you get your most of your information, and you feel like maybe that isn't enough, but that's all you can do. It totally is so valid. I can't go to rallies a lot either, and social media is totally my place. And it's like, I don't think it's performative at all, because we're doing the resource and the work online. And also just like, if you know you're educating yourself offline, it's kind of ignorant for people to be calling that, like telling you that, because the whole point about this, like making change and impact in the world, is really educating ourselves offline, whatever that means to us. And yeah, so like we all have, I mean, as so like, oh, sorry, I'm like all over the place today, but your limitations don't prevent you from like doing what you can. As Emma said, I pretty much just echoed what she said. Oh my gosh.
100%. No, I think that's such a good point. Like, you know your limit. If somebody's gonna say something to you and they don't know, like that's their problem. And if you think that you are doing the best you can, which I'm sure you are, that's fine. Like, there shouldn't be like a performative activist police. Like, there is no such thing. So you just do what you can, and that's all any of us can hope for.
Thank you all for your answers. And I definitely think that there is really like a fine line between, like Adriana said, like having a conversation and wanting to like coming from a place of like hate or maybe even hurt. And I think that is not necessarily your job as a person who's like seeing this to like help every single person that could use help, and just like being that resource that's there as a starting point is super important. And we have another audience question. So do you have any tips for people who are beginning to set up local activist organizations or movements?
I think for me, as someone who's networked a lot in like local spaces, it's really about networking and figuring out like who you want to work with, and like asking the person who runs that organization or like who works there, like, hey, can we go get some coffee and like let's get to know each other. And so networking in person is kind of awkward, but it's helped me a lot. And I think especially if you're just starting out or you're just like building your brand or your business or your organization, reaching out to organizations and brands that already exist and working with them can really help like amplify your message.
Yeah, also like more thing is just calling on the people you know will support you. So whether that's your friends, family, or like maybe your classmates if you're in school, or your neighbors, just finding people that you already know can support you and then adding on to that with the networking can help.
Yeah, just amplifying both of their messages. I'm still learning how to do that myself, so I really can't provide advice. So these answers were really helpful for me too.
Oh, one more thing. Sorry. So I started my own organization like last year. And something that's really helped is connecting with community organizations. So not everything you do has to be from the ground up. You can take a lot of the resources that already exist in your town or city or state, and tapping into those organizations. Like a few emails will go a long way.
Yeah, and that was our last question. And thank you to our audiences for asking such thought-provoking questions. And also thank you to all of our panelists, Kim, Adriana, and Emma, for sharing your insights and experiences. And we're going to move on to our Take Action session on Zoom after this. And during this next session, we'll work together to complete several petitions, educate ourselves on important social justice issues, and take action. So I think you can find a link in the chat below. And we will hope to see you there in a few minutes.
Yes, so thank you once again to all of our panelists, and we'll now be moving on to our next session.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.